In a small, peaceful suburban town where life moved at a slower pace, Sergeant Marcus Johnson stood out as someone who commanded respect without ever asking for it. A decorated Marine sniper with years of service under his belt, Marcus was known, not just for his sharp aim, but also for his calm demeanor and unwavering sense of duty. He had spent most of his adult life serving his country, deploying to some of the world's most dangerous places, yet he always carried himself with humility. When he returned home on leave after completing another grueling tour overseas, all he wanted was to reconnect with his family and enjoy a brief moment of normalcy before heading back into the fray. On that fateful day, Marcus decided to visit a local grocery store to pick up supplies for his mother, who loved cooking hearty meals when her son came home. Dressed casually in jeans and a plain t-shirt, he blended seamlessly into the crowd. No one would have guessed that beneath his quiet exterior lay the heart of a warrior, a man who had stared danger in the face countless times and emerged victorious. As he strolled through the aisles selecting fresh produce and snacks, Marcus felt a rare sense of peace. For once, he wasn't thinking about tactics or missions. He was simply living like any other civilian, but that tranquility shattered the moment he stepped outside the store. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Marcus loaded his bags into the trunk of his car, double-checking to make sure everything was secure. Just as he closed the trunk, two police officers approached him quickly, their expressions tense. One of them held up a hand, signaling for Marcus to stop moving. Confused but cooperative, Marcus froze, unsure what was happening. His military training kicked in. He knew better than to make sudden movements in situations like this, but his mind raced with questions. Why were they approaching him? What had he done? "Sir, can you please step away from the vehicle?" one officer demanded, his tone firm but laced with suspicion. Marcus raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked calmly, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. "We received a report about a suspicious individual matching your description," the second officer replied, his hand hovering near his holster. "We need to ask you a few questions." At first, Marcus thought it was a simple misunderstanding. After all, he was just a guy buying groceries. He reached into his pocket slowly, careful not to alarm them, and pulled out his military ID card. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Johnson, United States Marine Corps," he explained, holding the card up for them to see. Maybe there's been a mix-up. But instead of easing the tension, his words seemed to heighten it. The officers exchanged glances, their skepticism palpable. They didn't seem convinced by the ID or his explanation. Instead, they began barking more commands, insisting he keep his hands visible and refusing to let him explain further. Marcus tried to remain patient, knowing that cooperation was key in such scenarios. But as the minutes ticked by, frustration bubbled beneath his surface. How could they not see that he posed no threat? Couldn't they recognize the weight of his credentials? Things escalated rapidly. Despite Marcus's attempts to de-escalate the situation, the officers grew increasingly aggressive. Their voices rose, drowning out his pleas for understanding. Before he knew it, cold metal clamped around his wrists, handcuffs biting into his skin. Marcus couldn't believe what was happening. Here he was, a man who had risked his life for his nation, being treated like a criminal in broad daylight. Passers-by stopped in their tracks, staring in disbelief as the scene unfolded before them. Some whipped out their phones to record the incident, capturing every agonizing second. As Marcus sat in the back of the squad car, his mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Anger burned inside him, not just because of how he'd been treated, but because of what it represented. Was this really how people saw him? Not as a hero, not as a protector, but as someone to be feared simply because of the color of his skin. It was a bitter pill to swallow, especially for someone who had dedicated so much of his life to serving others. Yet even in that dark moment, Marcus resolved to stay composed. Losing control wouldn't help anyone. It would only give fuel to those quick to judge. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Within hours, videos of the altercation flooded social media platforms, sparking outrage across the country. People couldn't believe what they were seeing: a decorated Marine veteran, handcuffed and humiliated in front of witnesses. Comment sections lit up with messages of support for Marcus, alongside calls for accountability from law enforcement. Journalists scrambled to cover the story, turning what should have been a routine trip to the grocery store into a national conversation about race, authority, and justice. And while Marcus remained silent during those early days, letting his attorney handle the legal side of things, he couldn't ignore the impact his ordeal was having on society. What started as a mundane errand had spiraled into something far greater than Marcus could have imagined. Little did he know this was only the beginning of a journey that would test his resilience, challenge the systems he trusted, and ultimately force him to confront uncomfortable truths about the world he fought so hard to protect. The days following Sergeant Marcus Johnson's arrest felt like a whirlwind, not just for him but for the entire nation. As videos of the incident continued to circulate online, public outrage grew louder with each passing hour. Social media platforms became battlegrounds where people shared their thoughts, debated the implications, and demanded answers. Some users posted side-by-side comparisons of Marcus in his Marine uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, alongside images of him handcuffed in the parking lot. The stark contrast was impossible to ignore. It painted a vivid picture of how quickly respect could turn into suspicion, based solely on appearance. For Marcus, the emotional toll was immense. He had always prided himself on being a man of honor, someone who led by example both in and out of uniform. But now he found himself questioning everything he believed in. How could he continue to serve a country that seemed so divided? How could he trust institutions meant to protect him when they treated him like a threat? These were heavy thoughts for anyone to carry, let alone someone already burdened by the physical and mental scars of war. Yet Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. Deep down, he knew that reacting with anger would only perpetuate the cycle of misunderstanding. Still, it was hard not to feel betrayed. Meanwhile, protests erupted outside the police department where the officers involved worked. Hundreds of people gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Sergeant Johnson," and "Respect our heroes." Many veterans joined the demonstrations, standing shoulder to shoulder with civilians to show solidarity. Some even wore their uniforms, a powerful reminder of the sacrifices made by those in service. The atmosphere was charged with emotion. Anger, frustration, and sadness mingled together as speakers took turns addressing the crowd. They spoke about systemic issues within law enforcement, calling for reforms that would prevent similar incidents from happening again. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about every person who had ever been unfairly targeted because of their race or background. As the story gained traction, it caught the attention of lawmakers in Washington, D.C. Senators and representatives held press conferences, using Marcus's case as an example of why policing policies needed to change. On Capitol Hill, heated debates unfolded, with some arguing that the incident highlighted deep-rooted biases while others defended the officer's actions as standard protocol. Lawmakers grilled officials from the Department of Defense and various law enforcement agencies, demanding transparency and accountability. For many Americans watching these discussions unfold, it was a sobering reminder of how far the country still had to go in terms of equality and justice. Back in Marcus's hometown, the local community rallied around him. Neighbors brought food to his house, offering words of encouragement and support. Even strangers reached out, sending letters and messages expressing admiration for his courage and resilience. One letter, written by a young boy named Tyler, stood out among the rest. "Dear Sergeant Johnson," it began, "I want to be like you when I grow up. You're my hero." Reading those simple yet heartfelt words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. In that moment, he realized that his experience, though painful, had touched lives in ways he never anticipated. People were looking to him not just as a victim of injustice, but as a symbol of strength and perseverance. Behind the scenes, Marcus's legal team worked tirelessly to build a strong case against the officers involved. His attorney, Ms. Rachel Monroe, was a seasoned lawyer known for her tenacity and dedication to civil rights cases. She spent hours poring over evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing arguments that would expose the flaws in the officer's reasoning. "We're going to fight this tooth and nail," she assured Marcus during one of their meetings. "Not just for you, but for everyone who deserves better." Despite the mounting pressure, the officers maintained their stance that they acted according to procedure. Their defense team argued that the description provided over the radio, a black male wearing casual clothing, matched Marcus closely enough to warrant further investigation. They claimed there was no malicious intent behind the arrest and insisted that any mistakes made were unintentional. However, inconsistencies began to surface as more details emerged. Witnesses came forward, recounting how calm and cooperative Marcus had been throughout the encounter. Others pointed out that the vague description given to the officers could have applied to dozens of men in the area. These revelations cast doubt on the officers' version of events and fueled calls for greater scrutiny. Amidst all the chaos, Marcus struggled to find moments of peace. Sleep eluded him most nights, his mind replaying the incident over and over again. During the day, he tried to stay busy by spending time with his family and working on small projects around the house. But everywhere he went, reminders of what happened followed him. Strangers recognized him at the gas station or grocery store, thanking him for his service and apologizing for what he endured. While their kindness meant a lot, it also served as a constant reminder of the weight he carried, not just as a Marine, but as a representative of a larger issue affecting countless individuals across the country. As weeks turned into months, preparations for the trial intensified. Legal teams on both sides dug deeper into the facts, uncovering new evidence and crafting strategies to sway the jury. Media coverage remained relentless, dissecting every development and speculating about potential outcomes. For Marcus, the impending courtroom battle loomed large, filling him with a mix of anxiety and determination. He knew the trial wouldn't erase what happened, but it represented an opportunity to seek clarity and perhaps even spark meaningful change. Little did he know, however, that the courtroom would become the stage for an extraordinary act of leadership, one that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved and reshape the narrative surrounding his ordeal. The day of the trial arrived, and the small courthouse in Marcus's hometown buzzed with anticipation. Reporters from major news networks lined up outside, their cameras perched on tripods as they prepared to capture every detail of what promised to be a landmark case. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Family members, friends, activists, veterans, and curious citizens filled the benches, their eyes fixed on the front of the room. The air felt heavy with tension, a mix of hope and apprehension hanging over everyone present. For Sergeant Marcus Johnson, sitting quietly beside his attorney, Rachel Monroe, this was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a moment that would define how justice viewed him, and countless others like him. As the judge entered and called the court to order, the proceedings began. Ms. Monroe stood first, her voice steady but charged with emotion as she laid out the case for the prosecution. She painted a vivid picture of Marcus, a decorated Marine sniper who had risked his life time and again for his country, only to return home and face humiliation at the hands of those sworn to protect him. Using video footage from the incident, witness testimonies, and Marcus's impeccable service record, she argued that the officer's actions were not merely a mistake, but indicative of systemic biases within law enforcement. "This isn't just about one man being handcuffed in a parking lot," she said, her tone firm yet compassionate. "It's about whether we, as a society, value the sacrifices of our heroes or allow prejudice to overshadow their contributions." The defense team countered with arguments rooted in procedure and protocol. Their lead attorney, Mr. Gregory Lane, emphasized that the officers acted based on the information available to them at the time, a vague description broadcast over police radios. He portrayed the arrest as a necessary precaution, insisting that law enforcement must prioritize public safety above all else. "These officers did not set out to target Sergeant Johnson because of his race," Mr. Lane asserted, his voice calm but defensive. "They followed standard operating procedures, which are designed to ensure the safety of both civilians and officers." To bolster their argument, the defense called several witnesses, including colleagues of the officers, who testified about their professionalism and dedication to duty. Despite these efforts, cracks began to show in the defense's narrative. Under cross-examination by Ms. Monroe, inconsistencies emerged in the officers' accounts of the incident. One officer claimed he hadn't seen Marcus's military ID clearly, while another admitted they didn't thoroughly review it before, escalating the situation. Furthermore, civilian witnesses recounted how cooperative and respectful Marcus had been throughout the ordeal, contradicting the notion that he posed any threat. Each revelation chipped away at the credibility of the defense, turning the tide slightly in favor of the prosecution. As the trial progressed, emotions ran high. At one point, Marcus's mother took the stand, her voice trembling as she described the pain of seeing her son treated so unjustly. "Marcus has always been a good boy," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He joined the Marines to make a difference, to help people. And now I don't know if he'll ever trust anyone again." Her words struck a chord with many in the courtroom, drawing quiet sobs from some spectators and nods of agreement from others. It was impossible not to feel the weight of her grief and the broader implications of what her family had endured. Just when it seemed like the trial might spiral into chaos, an unexpected figure entered the room, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. General Patricia Reynolds, a 4-star general widely respected for her leadership and advocacy work, walked in with an air of quiet authority. Dressed in full uniform, her medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights, she commanded immediate attention. The murmurs that followed her arrival were hushed almost instantly as the judge acknowledged her presence. Everyone knew this was no ordinary visit. It signaled something significant. General Reynolds requested permission to address the court, and after a brief pause, the judge granted it. As she stepped forward, the room fell silent, save for the faint hum of cameras capturing the historic moment. Standing tall, she began speaking, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am here today not only as a representative of the United States Marine Corps, but as a fellow citizen deeply troubled by what has transpired," she said, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "Sergeant Marcus Johnson is not just a Marine. He is a testament to the values we hold dear: courage, integrity, and selflessness. To see him subjected to such treatment is nothing short of unacceptable." Her words resonated deeply, cutting through the noise of legal jargon and procedural debates. She went on to recount Marcus's achievements, highlighting specific missions where his skills saved lives and underscored the importance of teamwork and trust. "This man has bled for our nation, risked everything to keep us safe," she continued, her tone softening slightly as she turned toward Marcus. "And yet here we are, discussing whether he deserved to be treated with basic dignity. Let us not forget that respect is earned, yes, but it is also owed, especially to those who have given so much." Then, in a move that left the entire courtroom stunned, General Reynolds turned directly to the officers seated nearby. Looking them squarely in the eye, she said, "You may have followed protocol, but let me remind you of something. Protocols exist to serve humanity, not diminish it. What happened here was not just a failure of judgment, it was a failure of empathy. And empathy is not optional for those tasked with protecting others." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. When she finished, the courtroom erupted into applause, though the judge quickly called for order. But the impact of General Reynolds' speech was undeniable. For Marcus, it was a moment of validation, a powerful acknowledgement of his worth and sacrifices. For the officers, it was a sobering reminder of the responsibilities they carried. And for everyone else, it was a wake-up call, a stark illustration of the work still needed to bridge divides and foster mutual understanding. As the session adjourned for the day, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers, many of whom praised General Reynolds' intervention. Though the trial was far from over, he couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had shifted. Perhaps, he thought, this wasn't just about seeking justice for himself anymore. Perhaps it was about creating a future where no one else would have to endure what he had. With renewed determination, Marcus prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that his story was bigger than him, and that its outcome could ripple far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The days following General Patricia Reynolds's powerful address in the courtroom marked a turning point, not just for Sergeant Marcus Johnson's trial, but for the larger conversation it had ignited across the nation. News outlets replayed her speech repeatedly, analyzing every word and dissecting its implications. Social media platforms buzzed with reactions as people shared clips of her testimony alongside heartfelt messages of gratitude and calls for change. For many, her presence at the trial symbolized something rare: accountability from the highest levels of authority. It was clear that her words had struck a nerve, forcing individuals on all sides of the debate to reflect deeply on their beliefs and actions. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted noticeably after General Reynolds's intervention. The defense team appeared more cautious, their arguments less emphatic than before. They seemed acutely aware that their case now carried not only legal weight, but also symbolic significance. Every statement they made felt like an attempt to justify decisions that had already been cast in a harsh light. Meanwhile, Ms. Rachel Monroe, Marcus's attorney, capitalized on the momentum created by General Reynolds' speech. She skillfully wove references to the general's remarks into her closing arguments, framing the trial as a pivotal moment where justice could either affirm or betray the principles of fairness and equality. When it came time for Marcus himself to take the stand, the room grew so quiet you could hear the faint rustle of papers being shuffled. Dressed neatly in civilian clothes, Marcus exuded calmness despite the gravity of the situation. His voice, steady and measured, carried a quiet strength as he recounted the events of that fateful day in the parking lot. He described how he had tried to remain composed during the encounter, even as fear and frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "I've faced danger countless times in my career," he said, pausing briefly to collect his thoughts. "But nothing prepared me for feeling like a stranger in my own skin, like someone I wasn't, someone dangerous." His testimony resonated deeply with those listening, particularly when he spoke about the emotional toll the incident had taken on him. It's hard to explain what it feels like to serve your country, to put your life on the line, and then come home only to be treated like a threat, he admitted, his voice softening. It makes you question everything. Am I really seen as one of the good guys? Or is there always going to be this cloud hanging over me because of how I look? These raw, honest reflections humanized him further, reminding everyone present that behind the uniform and accolades was a man grappling with profound pain and disillusionment. As Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom erupted into murmurs of support. Even some members of the jury exchanged glances, visibly moved by his words. The prosecution rested its case shortly afterward, confident that they had presented a compelling argument rooted in both fact and emotion. The defense followed suit, though their closing statements lacked the conviction they had shown earlier in the trial. It was evident that the tide had turned against them, thanks in large part to General Reynolds's unflinching critique of systemic failures within law enforcement. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. While the officers involved were found not guilty of criminal charges, a decision met with groans of disappointment from some spectators. They were held accountable for administrative violations. This outcome left many feeling conflicted. On one hand, the lack of criminal consequences felt like a missed opportunity for true justice. On the other hand, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing signaled progress, however incremental. More importantly, the trial itself had succeeded in shining a spotlight on issues that extended far beyond Marcus's personal experience. In the aftermath of the verdict, General Reynolds once again stepped forward, this time addressing the public directly during a press conference held outside the courthouse. Standing beside Marcus, she reiterated her commitment to fostering meaningful change within both the military and civilian sectors. "What happened here today cannot be forgotten," she declared, her tone resolute yet compassionate. "We must use this moment as a catalyst for reform, to ensure that no service member, no citizen ever has to endure such treatment again." Turning to Marcus, she added, "And to you, Sergeant Johnson, I offer my sincerest apology on behalf of our institution. You deserved better, and we will do better." Marcus nodded solemnly, accepting her words with grace. Though the apology didn't erase the hurt he had endured, it offered a measure of closure and hope. In that moment, surrounded by supporters, and standing shoulder to shoulder with a four-star general who had publicly championed his cause, Marcus realized that his story had transcended him. It had become a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt marginalized or misunderstood, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, voices could still rise above the noise. In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work, channeling his energy into efforts aimed at bridging divides between law enforcement and communities of color. He partnered with organizations focused on racial equity, participated in town hall meetings, and collaborated with lawmakers to draft policies promoting accountability and transparency. His transformation from reluctant victim to proactive advocate inspired countless others to join the fight for systemic change. Veterans groups rallied around him, pledging their support for initiatives designed to educate officers about cultural sensitivity and implicit bias. Even some police departments reached out, eager to learn from his experiences and implement training programs that emphasized mutual respect. For Marcus, this newfound role brought challenges as well as rewards. There were days when the memories of his ordeal threatened to overwhelm him, triggering waves of anxiety and self-doubt. But he persevered, drawing strength from the people who believed in him and the knowledge that his efforts might prevent others from suffering similar injustices. He often thought back to the young boy who had written him that heartfelt letter, imagining a future where children like Tyler grew up in a world free from prejudice and fear. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, Marcus refused to let them define him. Instead, he chose to see them as reminders of his resilience, proof that he had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. With each passing day, he found solace in knowing that his journey wasn't just about seeking justice for himself. It was about paving the way for a brighter, more inclusive future, and while the road ahead promised to be long and arduous, Marcus faced it with the same determination that had carried him through every mission, every challenge, and every battle. Little did he know, however, that the greatest chapter of his story was yet to unfold, one that would test his resolve, deepen his impact, and solidify his legacy as a beacon of hope in a world desperate for change. As the dust settled from the trial, Sergeant Marcus Johnson found himself at a crossroads. The courtroom verdict may not have delivered the sweeping justice many had hoped for, but it had ignited something far greater, a movement fueled by empathy, understanding, and a shared desire for change. For Marcus, this was both an opportunity and a responsibility. He knew that his story had become a symbol of resilience, and he couldn't let it end with just words or fleeting attention. If real progress was to happen, action needed to follow. In the months after the trial, Marcus dedicated himself fully to advocacy work. His first step was collaborating with General Patricia Reynolds to launch a nationwide initiative aimed at improving relations between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Dubbed Bridges of Trust, the program focused on fostering dialogue through workshops, training sessions, and community events. Officers were encouraged to sit down with residents, not as authority figures but as fellow human beings, to share stories, address concerns, and build mutual respect. Veterans like Marcus played a central role in these discussions, offering unique perspectives shaped by their experiences, serving alongside diverse teams in high-pressure environments. One particularly memorable event took place in a small town, where tensions between police and locals had reached a boiling point. Marcus stood before a packed auditorium, flanked by officers and community leaders, and spoke candidly about his own journey. "I'm not here to villainize anyone," he said, his voice steady yet warm. "I'm here because I believe we can do better. For ourselves, for our families, and for future generations." As he recounted his ordeal, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. When he finished speaking, several officers approached him privately, expressing regret for how similar incidents might have unfolded under their watch. These moments of vulnerability marked the beginning of meaningful connections, proof that change, though slow, was possible. Beyond bridges of trust, Marcus also worked closely with lawmakers to push for legislative reforms. One of his proudest achievements came when Congress passed the Accountability and Respect Act, which mandated cultural sensitivity training for all law enforcement agencies across the country. The bill included provisions for independent oversight committees tasked with reviewing cases of alleged misconduct, ensuring transparency and accountability. While signing the act into law, the president acknowledged Marcus's contributions, calling him a true patriot who reminds us what it means to serve with honor. Despite these victories, Marcus faced challenges along the way. Not everyone welcomed his efforts with open arms. Some critics dismissed him as overly idealistic, arguing that systemic issues were too deeply entrenched to fix. Others accused him of undermining law enforcement, despite his repeated insistence that he respected the vital role officers played in society. Online trolls targeted him relentlessly, posting hateful comments and questioning his motives. At times, the negativity weighed heavily on him, threatening to derail his progress. But Marcus refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, he leaned on his support system, his family, friends, mentors like General Reynolds, and even strangers who reached out with messages of encouragement. His perseverance paid off in unexpected ways. As word of his advocacy spread, invitations poured in, from schools, universities, and organizations eager to hear his story. Marcus embraced these opportunities, using them as platforms to inspire young people to dream big and stand up for what they believed in. During one school visit, he met Tyler, the boy who had written him that heartfelt letter years earlier. Now a teenager, Tyler greeted Marcus with a shy smile and handed him a new note. Inside it read, "You're still my hero. Thank you for showing me that kindness matters." Holding back tears, Marcus realized just how much his actions resonated with others, even those he might never meet face to face. Over time, Marcus's influence extended beyond national borders. International media outlets covered his story, sparking conversations about racial bias and policing practices worldwide. Activists in other countries reached out, seeking advice on implementing programs similar to Bridges of Trust. Marcus traveled abroad to share his insights, learning from global leaders while sharing lessons from his own experience. Each trip reinforced his belief in the power of unity and collaboration, reminding him that struggles for equality transcended geography and culture. Back home, Marcus continued balancing his advocacy work with personal healing. Therapy sessions helped him process the trauma of his arrest, allowing him to confront lingering doubts and fears. He reconnected with old friends, rediscovered hobbies he'd neglected during his deployments, and spent quality time with his family. Slowly but surely, he began to feel whole again, not defined solely by his past, but strengthened by it. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on how far he'd come. What started as a routine trip to the grocery store had transformed into a mission that touched countless lives, including his own. Years later, Marcus looked back on his journey with pride and humility. The scars remained, yes, but so did the lessons. He learned that courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about standing firm in your values, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. He discovered that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to move forward without letting bitterness anchor you to the past. And perhaps most importantly, he realized that true strength lay not in individual triumphs, but in collective action. Change wasn't something one person could achieve alone. It required teamwork, patience, and unwavering commitment. Today, Marcus is celebrated not only as a Marine sniper, but as a bridge builder, a voice for the voiceless, and a beacon of hope. Statues and plaques honoring his contributions dot public, spaces serving as reminders of the impact one person can make. Yet Marcus remains grounded, always quick to remind others that he's simply doing what feels right. "It's not about me," he often says. "It's about making sure no one else has to walk in my shoes." And so, Sergeant Marcus Johnson's legacy endures, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of hope. Through his efforts, he proved that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge. That, even when systems fail, individuals can rise to create ripples of change, and that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but within our own hearts and communities. In the end, Marcus showed the world that heroes aren't defined by medals or titles, they're defined by the lives they touch and the futures they help shape.